Why? It's 1534 and Spain is in this brutal war with the Inca Empire. If Spain wants to send ships supplying its army, it had to go around the southern tip of South America and go to Peru. As you can imagine, that takes a mighty long time. Wouldn't it be amazing if there was a passage somewhere in the Americas that can act as a shortcut? So that's where the dream of the Panama Canal came from. And over the years, there were many efforts to build the canal. The Spanish tried, the British tried, and after gold was discovered in California, the Americans tried. The first shot that really went anywhere started in 1875 by the French. France had just came back from the Franco-Prussian War. The French suffered a humiliating defeat, losing power over large areas of France, even Paris. This made the post-war French itch for a win that would restore their image. They believed an engineering marvel, like the Suez Canal, which they had recently completed, would do exactly that. So they approached Ferdinand de Lesseps, the same entrepreneur which constructed the Suez Canal, to make a canal in the Americas. Lesseps sent out 2 expeditions to survey the land, to determine what type of canal to build and what path it should take. The first expedition told Lesseps that he should construct a lock-type canal. Lesseps didn't like this idea, so he sent out a second expedition who told him he could build a sea-level canal. But hold up, what do sea-level canal and lock-type canal mean? Sea-level canal is straightforward. It's a flat cut from ocean to ocean, letting water flow free. But if an area has a high elevations, engineers may consider a lock-type canal. The canal is split into several sections at different elevations, with these locks between them. A ship enters the first segment, which is at a lower height. A gate at the bottom of the second lock opens, letting water flow into the first segment until the water pulls up and water levels are even. Then, the lock opens and the ship goes to the second segment, and so on and so forth. Lesseps is sure this will be a breeze. Many engineers advised against him, even Gustave Eiffel, the man behind the Eiffel Tower. But Lesseps was an entrepreneur and not an engineer. And the French Parliament, dazzled with Lesseps' track record, decided to fund his estimated, adjusted for inflation, $3.6 billion project. But a thing to consider is that the construction of the Suez Canal was relatively simple. It was a flat, arid desert with a predictable climate. As the French were soon to learn, the Panama Canal was a different beast entirely. $40,000 workers were assembled, most of whom were Afro-Caribbean. And on New Year's Day in 1881, construction began. Armand Reclus kicked things off as the head engineer, realized what a nightmare this project was, and resigned. And he wouldn't be the last engineer that would leave the project. So why did so many people quit or die? Because this project was extremely difficult. Panama's weather was constantly fighting with the engineers and workers. Frequent floods, torrents, and rainstorms occurred due to Panama's humidity. In fact, Panama's climate was so rainy and humid, the steel machinery would rust, rendering them useless for the workers. And workers frequently had to widen and shave down mountains to avoid landslides into the canal. The Panama jungles were also packed with venomous snakes and insects, but worst of all, disease. The damp environment of Panama bred mosquitoes, lots and lots of them. And mosquitoes spread diseases such as malaria and yellow fever. The French construction of the canal got so deadly, the mortality rate got as high as 200 a month by 1884. Soon, engineers realized that a sea-to-sea canal wasn't feasible, and a lock canal would be more realistic. Engineers tried convincing Lesseps to change his plans, but he insisted on a sea-to-sea canal. By 1887, the project was on life support, with all the deaths, landslides, mudslides, and floods. And as a last-ditch effort to keep the project going, Lesseps finally caved in and allowed for a sea-to-sea canal. 2 engineers, Eiffel and Dingler, were put in charge of designing the locks, but in 1889, all the money dried up and construction was suspended, and the company went bankrupt. By the end of the project, 8,000 investors had lost their savings. $9.73 billion, adjusted for inflation, had been wasted, and 22,000 men lost their lives during the construction. France's motto, if at first you don't succeed, lose spectacularly. Sure, the French had completely embarrassed themselves, but they had managed to excavate nearly 60 million cubic meters of earth, and they had finished around 2/5 of the project. The surviving machinery used by the French were later used by Americans when they took over. Speaking of Americans, for a while now, the Americans wanted a canal through Central America. A survey done by President Grant had recommended a path through Nicaragua. The Americans even set up their own company to start on the canal in Nicaragua, but it went bankrupt before anything could happen. It was William Cornwell that convinced the government to look at alternative routes. By 1901, the American government was stuck between Nicaragua and continuing where the French had left off in Panama. It was President Theodore Roosevelt that chose the Panama Canal. Historian David McCullough credits Roosevelt as the main man behind the endeavor, even though the canal's construction was also under the Taft and Wilson administrations. And keep in mind, Taft visited the canal 7 times as President and Secretary of War and gave it a lot of attention. Oh, how the tides of history discredit you, Taft. Anyways, Roosevelt's administration bought the land of the Panama Canal and all equipment for $40 million from France, which would be around $1.5 billion today. The French sold the canal for 15% of the money they put in. The French humiliated themselves again. So now, the USA has the lands to build the canal, but not the rights. Back then, Panama was controlled by Colombia, so the Americans negotiated a treaty with the Colombian government. In 1903, the Hay-Herran Treaty was signed, giving America a lease over the land that was meant for the canal. But later on, the Senate of Colombia rejected the treaty when it was brought to them. Many business owners and residents of Panama were enraged, as they believed the canal would bring them prosperity. One thing led to another, and you have an independence movement in Panama, backed by Manuel Guerrero and backed by frustrated Americans. Colombia heard of this and sent troops to Panama, and things got real quick. A Panamanian general lured the Colombian general to Panama City and arrested him, and the troops were persuaded to leave, mainly by the threat of the USS Nashville. Shortly after, Panama declared its independence, and America immediately recognized it. America and Panama signed a treaty giving the US the right to build the canal. The Americans took over on May 4th, 1904. The French infrastructure was shaky and their workforce small. John Findlay Wallace started as the chief engineer, but due to rules and bureaucracy, he resigned and was replaced by John Frank Stevens. Stevens got to work, but at first, not on the canal. He made housing, cafeterias, hotels. He fixed water and transport systems, all of which would be used by the large numbers of workers coming in. He recruited massive amounts of workers, mainly from the Caribbean. Colonel William Gorgas was appointed to tackle the disease problem. He focused on eradicating mosquitoes, which caused the spread of malaria and yellow fever. It was a pricey fight, and he met opposition. But with the approval of Roosevelt, Gorgas went on, and in 2 years, malaria and yellow fever were basically eliminated. Despite all this, 5,600 workers still lost their lives. It was late 1905, and no one had a clue on whether they were building a sea-level canal or a lock canal. After several studies, Roosevelt decided on a lock-type canal. In 1907, Stevens resigned and was replaced by Major George Washington Goethals. He split the work into 3 divisions: Atlantic, Central, and Pacific. The Atlantic and Pacific divisions were tasked with locks, dams, and breakwaters of their respective sides, while the Central Division was responsible over the Coonabarra Cut, which was the process of excavating an artificial valley over here. The high ridges there rose over 110 meters. The project needed this ridge to be shaved down, but the hard rocks of it posed a challenge to excavate. 6,000 workers worked on this, using dynamite to excavate 160 trains full of dirt. The project required 2 artificial lakes to be made, Gouton Lake and Miraflores Lake. On October 10, 1913, Woodrow Wilson sent a telegraph to Panama, triggering an explosive that flooded the Coonabarra Cut. In 1914, the project was finally completed. The Americans spent $15.2 billion adjusted for inflation on the project. It marked the completion of the biggest American engineering scheme ever. The SS Ancon became the first ship to officially cross the Panama Canal. A ship that started off in New York and was heading to San Francisco could save 30 days of travel time. Around 5,700 people lost their lives during the American project.
Panama's promise to us has been broken. The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
After World War II, the Americans pressured France and UK to withdraw from the Suez Canal. Now, the people of Panama saw this and thought the US should withdraw from the canal, as the US still ran and controlled the canal. Tensions rose, and finally, President Carter signed the Torrijos-Carter Treaty in 1977. Starting in 1979, America would slowly ease off on the canal, allowing Panama to take over. By 1999, America had fully withdrawn from the canal, and Panama had assumed control of the canal. And there you have it, the full history of the Panama Canal.